Welcome back to the Lore and Valor podcast. I am joined once again by my friend Sam Platisky, independent filmmaker extraordinaire, and my other friend and author extraordinaire and former Frogman, Mike Massa, and we are finally covering the Terminal List finale. Life got in the way for all of us a little bit. Got kind of hard to schedule this, but we are back. I know Mike secured a bottle of Hooten Young this time to help with the review. I do not have mine because I'm traveling. I actually had to get on a plane, so I didn't bring my whiskey with me. I am stuck with Four Roses, which is the best thing the bar downstairs had in terms of bourbon.
This is all right.
It's not bad at all, but Hooten Young is better. So anyway, it's been a great, I will confess, I like the Terminal List. As we get into it, I'll go ahead and I won't bury the lead. I still like this show a great deal, and I'm hopeful for season 2. But I've had more fun talking about it with you guys than I have watching it, to tell you the truth. This has been a good conversation. Yeah.
You're welcome.
Yeah. I've rewatched a few of the episodes to get ready for our chats, and some of them stand up, and on rewatching, some of them don't. And this episode didn't stand up as well as I'd hoped.
Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. So off the bat, Mike, what are some of your? We'll go ahead and start with a little nitpick. So, what's one of the big ones that struck you this time that was like, on second watch, I don't like that as much?
Let me preface by saying that the season finale did what it had to do. It provided a satisfying and sufficiently credible explanation for what happened to all the main characters. There are any number of what I'll characterize as tactical misrepresentations that are clearly made for the purposes of making an exciting and frankly visible finale. So, for example, and jumping ahead, lots of spoilers, of course, our heroes will find themselves eventually assaulting the island, and it is not only not pitch black, it is illuminated at least as well as you would illuminate a beach at dusk or dawn.
Yeah,
and really even when the illumination is somehow removed from a sniper on Overwatch, gosh, it's still awfully darn light.
Yeah, I'm actually a lighting professional in my day job, Mike, and I can tell you that actually met safety requirements.
Yeah,
looking at it like that those were lit to IES standard.
I'm not gonna hop on the firearms details too much, but I will note that the producers of the show, who up to this point had done a reasonably good, or at least not a terrible job of representing terminal effects, lethal effects of projectiles, couldn't help themselves, and they had to use a yank rig when it shows the guy with the high power sniper rifle shooting one of the bad guys on the beach, and the guy flies back 2 body lengths, magically somehow. They couldn't help themselves. I'm like, oh really? We were almost there. We were so close. We almost had it. That Hollywood guy blown across the room by a bullet.
It's a magical 50 caliber bullet, Mike.
Yeah.
Magical 50 caliber bullets suspend gravity in the area around their impact.
Yeah. I'm not gonna hop on the guns too much. They really, for the first time, they really got some of the wound mechanics wrong. Early on in that scene, our hero suffers a fairly traumatic wound to his left temple and forehead, and it's sufficient that he extracts a 3-inch splinter from the wound a couple minutes later after that is incurred, and entirely unrealistic is the fact that he is immediately blinded in one eye by a sheet of blood covering his face. Scalp wounds and facial wounds bleed like a scene out of a horror film. Blood everywhere. And if you have a cut anywhere up near your eyes, the blood gets in your eyes and you just cannot see. So that's
true fact.
But then we couldn't see Chris Pratt's face. So
that handsome face
is very handsome.
You got to balance it out.
I'm skipping through a lot, but the last thing I'll hop on before letting someone else have their say is one of the bad guys we don't expect. The big reveal is that the SecDef, Secretary Rafe, Secretary Hartley. That's it, Hartman. Thank you.
Hartman, who is much less of a Clinton stand-in. In the books, I feel like she's just a Hillary Clinton stand-in. It's very clear. Her characterization is such that it's very clear who she's supposed to be. In this one, she's more three-dimensional.
Yeah, I agree. But in this show, Reese is getting ready to shoot her, despite the reporter's best efforts to say, "Look, she's not as dirty as everybody else." And his comment is, "She's on the battlefield. She lit the fuse. She's going to die." And before he can shoot her, while the reporter's trying to talk him off the ledge, so to speak, the secretary produces a gun, the slowest draw stroke you ever saw, puts it to her head and kills herself. And she doesn't get shot by Reese. So if you're holding a gun at someone, you're getting ready to shoot them, and a gun shows up in your peripheral vision, you're going to drop the hammer on them. That gun's never going to finish the draw stroke. And he's like actually looking at her through his red dot. So it wasn't like he had to come off a low ready or come down from a high ready or get a sight picture. He had a bead. And she goes, da, 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 da. Okay. And he's like, "Oh, wow, shocker. I'm surprised." She gets the round off.
Jean Triplehorn is a notable actress, and they wanted her death sequence to be, drawn out as well. So
going back to my initial comment, the narrative arc accomplished what it had to do. I am technically nitpicking, and I think even an absolute, what would I call it?
Someone with no experience tactically,
a brand new shooter who was up and looking through a sight at a, say, 3 meters range is going to drop someone before they can reach into a drawer, withdraw a pistol, put it against their head, and pull the trigger. So I had a hard time, and a person who's already keyed up, like their fight or flight reflex is all the way down to the max. There's very little discrimination going on at that point, especially when you already have an injury, right?
Yeah. So anyhow,
I'm going to calm down. Back to you, sir.
We will be jumping around this episode because it is the finale, and we'll try to close out with the end of the show and talk about for hopes for season 2. But I will say I actually have a narrative problem with that scene as well as a technical tactical problem, because I agree with you about the issue of she manages to pull a gun, put it to her head, and pull the trigger before Reese riddles her with bullets. Yeah, that's a problem. But more importantly than that, I hate, because this is not the only show that does this, but Terminalist, this is the first time that Terminalist does this, is that, if you kill her now, it's going to be murder. And I'm like, Reese just dropped like 20 bodyguards, contractors who arguably didn't really deserve it. Like, I get it, like exigencies of your mission. You don't know that everyone you're shooting is a genuinely bad human being. I get it. But if he shot them, shooting Hartley isn't any morally worse.
Well, I'll go even further. Shooting them is worse, because in order to get a job as a close protective detail to a head of state level kind of person like that character represents, the SecDef, you go through all kinds of background checks, sometimes a poly depending. I mean, they if you're playing for one of the majors, they really look at you really hard, and pretty much only fairly upstanding citizens make it through. If you're a good operator but a dirtbag, they don't pick you for that kind of job. So all those dudes he dropped, probably solid family men, because you like to have people with something to go home to that aren't like young hotheads. Yeah, I would say it's worse, not the same.
Yeah, and admittedly, that's context the average
paycheck, right?
Yeah. That's context the average viewer isn't going to have, but it's true. And the people behind this show do know that, like Jack Carr knows that. He's a Navy SEAL, and a lot of his technical advisors on this do know that. So I think it's worthwhile to ping them on, and I don't know how much of that was forced. Again, like that sentiment is not in the book.
So I'm not the targeted audience for that level of detail in this kind of thing. If it had been, so let's look at how the U.S. has gone after high value targets that were in a fortified safe house with large numbers of bodyguards. Step 1, you lay about 5 JDAMs on it, and then you go through with dogs and look for the parks. I mean, that's typically what we do.
Yeah.
If you're in a
JDAM is a GPS-guided bomb, everyone who's not tracking.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it's big booms. But the one-man assault literally up the lit front steps of the house and in the front door up the stairs and pulling that off, very satisfying emotionally because you want your guy to win, right?
Mm-hmm.
But God help me if we were to try that for real. That wouldn't go so well.
Yeah. There's a saying, you know, like, Mike, I'm sure you're familiar with it as I am. 2 is 1 and 1 is none, right? That applies to people as well. You know, that like we talk about it mostly with equipment, but largely if you're going into violence, you try to never do it alone, right? Because as soon as you're incapacitated, there was only one of you, you're done. The mission's over. You know, so, and I get that he has sniper support from Ben, who I still like as a character, and I still like what the series did with him. But that you wouldn't, no matter how badass you are and how thick your plot armor is, you really should.
Sam, you know that you've seen Captain America: Civil War, right?
Yeah.
And that really amazing, satisfying scene in the elevator when they pack the elevator full of dudes to take him down, and he figures it out. And he goes, and then he asks the question before we get started: does anybody want to get off? And then it came on, right? So there's a really good interview with one of the stuntmen that was in that scene. And he thought he was, I won't say sure it wouldn't come off, but like, I can look at that and see all of us kind of falling against each other to give the guy who's opposite Steve Rogers at the time a chance to do a few blows as he rotates around and fights in a circle, basically. Where in reality, 20 dudes on one, it's a foregone conclusion. No matter how badass you are, you're not going to, right? But it's a very satisfying scene. Like, I was pumped for that scene, even though I knew, come on, man. So in a similar way, I can see someone being totally jazzed for the outcome of the scene, even though realistically, you know, all the extras off stage are waiting for their turn to get shot. I'm sorry. I'm gonna stop there. A really cool scene that we have that doesn't get a lot of play, I think, where they built a lot of great tension, was the checkpoint.
Yeah.
Where the state Mounties stopped the low-profile $100,000 Mercedes Sprinter van.
That a poor surfer has.
That a poor surfer beach bum had. But that actually had some legit tension, and I really dug it.
Yeah. It's my understanding from listening to podcasts from various members of your community that surfing is a fairly common hobby.
For the West Coast guys, yeah.
Yeah, amongst frogmen. So I feel like it is fairly clever for Edwards to use, you know, a cover that he's already familiar with, but that can be so culturally different from who they're looking for. You know, that it's like, oh yeah, no, he knows he can talk about surfing if he needs to, but also no one's going to be looking for a hippie, from a dude with long blonde flowing locks and a you know, mañana time attitude, so to speak. I agree with you. I liked it a lot. I liked just the this is one of the few times we get some quiet moments with,
and they needed it because the way the last one ended was exactly the opposite of that, right?
Yeah.
So I mean, you can argue that the episode preceding this, Reese isn't operating in a moral gray area, right? He's doing bad things to bad people, and he's a bad guy, right? I mean, how did he get that Navy PAO or legal officer to wear the IED into the admiral's office, right? He didn't just ask nicely.
No.
Yeah, he threatened a kid, which is like, in my opinion, that is the one thing Reese does in the whole show that I'm like, I can't make an argument for that. I don't know, like, that's rough. I mean, I can, but like that's the closest to the edge he gets. Like, and like they pull back before he actually hurts the kid or the wife, except for psychologically, because they're now traumatized for life.
Like the movie Taken, right? You've seen that, guys, right?
Mm-hmm.
When he goes in and his French police buddy's not going to help him, and he goes there for dinner, and it's really tense, but the wife's oblivious, and she puts the kids to bed, comes back in, demands the information. The French cop says no, so he busts a cap in the French wife's leg, in the cop's wife's leg. Like, just boom. Are we going to talk yet, or do I keep going? And you're like, holy shit, Liam Neeson, what are you doing, man? You're the good guy. So usually, as a writing device, when you have a character hurt a minor, it's meant to be a signal. You're transmitting, this is the bad guy. If there was any doubt, this is the bad guy. And oh, by the way, you're probably going to get some satisfaction later because I'm going to kill that guy really nasty.
Mm-hmm.
So I wasn't sure if it was just kind of a curious writing choice, or if they were trying to build tension, if people subconsciously or overtly would recognize that that's the mechanism, right? And so now we're thinking, well, shit, is Reese actually going to pull it off? Because they made him the bad guy, and bad guys get their just desserts. So I'm not sure. It's an interesting question. In the comic world and the action movie world, usually, it's rare, I guess, that kids actually get hurt. That's like one of the no-nos, right, Sam?
Yeah, I mean, no. I mean, you don't hurt kids in anything, really. The good guy doesn't, anyway. And even the bad guys don't as much anymore because they want to give the bad guys some moral gray area, too. But I don't know. I mean, like, that's one of the things that bothered me about the series as a whole is, he starts out and he's clearly, or fairly clearly, once you realize he's not hallucinating or anything, he's going after bad guys. Mm-hmm. And they're bad guys. It's Sean Gunn. I don't remember the character's name. Sean Gunn. Then it's the other guy who is like, the wannabe. And then you have like the really bad guys that were in the military, like the one asshole that he blows up with the vest. But then like you're going after like, this kid's the guy's family is like there. And then like the whole thing with the sect death didn't really work for me as much either. And everybody, like, it didn't occur to me, like, like you said, that, they're probably really good guys that were defending her because they would only take really good guys. It just occurred to me, like, they're just doing their job, regardless, like, they don't know what she's been into. They don't know what everybody else has been into. And he's killing these people who are innocent people. And it gets to a point where, like, I can, like, be down with Punisher killing bad and mobsters and all that shit. But like, if he starts killing innocent people, you can't really root for him as much anymore.
Yeah, when Frank Castle does that one-man assault on the guy's house, right, in the movie, one of the recent movies, everybody he kills is a criminal, and he ends with the criminal in charge. These are just hapless contractors, right?
Yeah.
I think the way that the writers expect the viewers to regard those is as the prototypical bad guy private military contractors, right? So whether it's Wagner and their ilk doing bad things in Ukraine now, or it's the much hyped, endlessly reported contractors in Iraq and Afghanistan, many, some of whom did bad things, most of whom did a good job, took a paycheck and went home.
Yeah, Blackwater.
Blackwater, Triple Canopy, or the military part of KBR. I mean, picking any of them, right?
Yeah.
There are dozens of them, more than that, operating. But the ones that got the most airtime were the ones, what was Blackwater specifically, for the Nice Square shooting incident. And then that became a reason to oppose what was increasingly becoming an unpopular part of the war, right? On the heels of Abu Ghraib, yada, yada, yada. So I think that's how we're supposed to regard these guys. They work for a PMC. The name of the PMC is something scary. They're called Talos, right? Mm-hmm. And therefore, they're just handy red shirts. But I know guys that work for companies like that, and they're like you and me. Yeah. Actually, some of them look like Sam. They look completely unremarkable and calm, salt family lives, pets, cats, the works. And they go to work and they protect people or they protect equipment.
Yeah. Yeah, no, that's true. I think. Go ahead.
I think it was just an echo.
Yeah, I was getting an echo. But yeah, no, I agree. It is unfortunate that it's almost unfortunate that Mike, you and I know how that works. That like it's like, yeah, no, you can't think of them as evil mercenaries when you know for a fact that they're the exact same guys that Reese and Ben are in many ways. They're drawn from the same pool of people. So it's a little disingenuous for Reese to gun his way through all of them, and then for Katie to be morally outraged that he would shoot a flagrantly corrupt politician.
So it's interesting how her character got the most intense part of her role right at the end, right? Because she does two things. She mousetraps the secretary into admitting guilt because she's a super smart, super ethical reporter, which kind of rehabilitates the whole journalist thing inadequately for me, but that's a different story. But she exhibits physical courage, right? The character physically interposes herself between Reese's gun barrel and his target, which would make me pucker, right? Here comes a guy bleeding. He just finished blacking 20 guys outside. That's his target, and I'm going to get in between them? I might negotiate from an angle, I think, just for safety's sake. So that was a really cool, intense moment.
I agree. It's not bad. It's not badly blocked, but I can tell you, I would not take a bullet for Lorraine Hartley. Nope. I've risked my ass for a lot of things, but not her.
That actress might be, I should say, that actor. I think the current nomenclature is to use actor regardless of sex of the person in playing the character, right?
Sam would be more up to that.
It depends. It depends.
I mean, unless you're
at awards things, you still call them actresses and actors.
Yeah.
So
you don't see the Oscars cutting their awards by half, but she seemed to be the best technical actor. Was always on point, had the broadest range of facial expressions, was definitely delivering the role in a credible way. And if you hadn't read the book, she actually came across as a good guy for a big chunk of the story, right?
Yeah.
So I actually thought that was going to be a red herring, that somebody was trying to set her up as, and I actually thought that it was Ben who was trying to set her up to make it seem like she was the last person that he had to go after, and then that would be it. But so I really didn't think it was her at all. But if you go back to one of our first episodes, it was why is she doing what? I don't know if I'm pausing. Why is the Secretary of Defense showing up at this to see this guy? And this is why, she's involved with this whole thing.
Yeah,
so I like how that came together. But otherwise, I didn't see it coming.
We addressed at the very start how unlikely it would be that the senior most member of the military establishment, the Secretary of Defense, who's even senior to the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs, for example, the Secretary of Defense is actually in the line of succession if enough people, like President, Vice President, and so forth, die. Chairman of the Joint Chiefs is not, or if that person is, they're way down the list. I don't think
all the civilian leadership has to be dead, basically, at that point.
Yeah, before. So, a neat thing that I didn't touch on, but I appreciated, is this was one of the, after a horrible representation of what a thermal sight looked like in the old Navy SEAL movie with Charlie Sheen and Michael Biehn back in the day, circa 1995 it came out, or 90, actually earlier, 93, 92.
Did that come out when you were already in the Navy, Mike, or was that before you were in the Navy?
It came out, it came out right after I graduated from BUD/S, because it had debuted while I was at Army Basic Parachute Training.
Gotcha.
And they separate the officers from the enlisted SEALs for the first time in in the teams. They make you train separately, and so the officers are delayed for 2 weeks doing some kind of officer orientation bullshit, and the enlisted guys go right away to Fort Benning. So we get there, and they're in jump week, right? And we're like, all right, hey guys, because they're I won't say they're our best buds, but they kind of are our best buds. You just spent 6 months with your class, right? Every day, 6 days a week, doing stuff with them. And I knew my boat crew better than I knew my siblings. So I go up and I go to the enlisted housing area, and all the Army guys are looking at me like, "The fuck is an officer doing here?" And I walk in and I had a backpack full of beers and ice, and I sit down and I'm passing them out. My guys were like, "Oh, this is nothing new," and the Army guys were like, "What?" And I'm like, "Hey guys, I'm here. I got to know. So what's the word? Where's the game?" Like, "Oh, you're lucky, sir. There's some really hot female second lieutenants." I'm like, "All right, dish." And so, I'm ashamed to say that what God, we did some embarrassing things inspired by that film.
I'm not shocked.
But the only thing that might, when you do embarrassing things in retrospect, you're like, that's so stupid, but they worked. I don't know, was it stupid or merely embarrassing? I don't know. But to pull it back to what I was talking about, the thermal sight in that Michael Biehn, Charlie Sheen movie was absurdly bad. In the assault on the Secretary of Defense's personal compound on the island, we see our lead character doesn't just deploy flashbangs in the traditional Hollywood manner. He actually deploys a dispersant, a gas, a smoke. And he's shooting through the smoke at the thermal images, the targets that he can see and they can't. I'm like, that's actually reasonably kind of correct.
Yeah.
And it was fun to see.
We do that. Even regular units do that now. Yeah.
Oh, they use thermals to shoot through smoke? On
Yep.
assault?
Well, and furthermore, like, so thermals through smoke. So we've done that before. They've even captured that in the video games these days, Mike. And the other thing is just PEC-15s and thermal capable nods. So what I just said is PEC-15 is an IR laser, Sam.
Right.
So it's infrared, you can't see it with bare eyes. So when you flip down your night vision devices that have an IR capability, you can see the IR lasers, but the enemy can't unless they have the same frequency.
Unless they also have nods.
Yeah. So a couple different things. One, you're laser pointing and they can't even see the laser pointing at them until you shoot them. Second really valuable thing is in Iraq and Afghanistan, what you would do is you'd have just on your rifle, if you're doing close air support and you're talking people onto target, you could, you're like, all right, I'm this end of the laser and I'm going to rope or I'm going to, strafe the target with my IR laser to let the, Apache or, A-10 or whoever, get oriented visually on where you are versus where the bad guys are. So basically that added a talk-on capability for every soldier who had one. And by the end of the war, or at least I should say by the end of the war in my involvement, it went on for a few more years after I got out.
But a PEC is still shooting IR. You're looking at it through a passive light collection device, not a thermal scope, right? If you deploy smoke against IR, it actually works, right? Because an IR laser can't penetrate smoke very far.
Yeah, true.
And I just thought it was a neat, fairly accurate representation, and one of the first time, maybe the first time that I can recall seeing that represented in contemporary entertainment media. So you're right, it is current tactics. It's just I rarely see that, right? Yeah,
no, it's true, and it was good. I also think that there was a moment towards the finale that's actually pretty controversial where the guy opens up the safe room with the secretary and Reese still shoots him. And I'm like, I mean, kind of fucked up, but also do you leave that guy behind you? Like, it's like after everything you
at that point, I mean, what's you've already done so much.
Yeah. Like, so Sam, Mike and I have been talking the military angle for a while now, and I know you've chimed in, but I want to go ahead and hear your thoughts for a little bit. What about, is there anything we haven't covered yet that was either exceptionally good or, really rung your bell and made you wish you were watching Sandman instead? Spoilers.
Spoilers. Sandman wasn't out yet at this point. This was a long time ago.
Yeah.
I mean, the whole series as a whole, it had its ups and downs, and I think the last episode, tied everything up nicely. The whole SecDef thing, I would have preferred if that was a red herring. I think that would have been a little more interesting to me. I think, it would have been a little bit better if, Reese wasn't so, not even like morally gray, morally ambiguous, just a little bit more, heroic type, so we can root for him more. Because, I mean, I was on board with him for like the first more than half the series. The only other time I was like, well, what are you doing, is when he had the shootout in a city street. That was a little off too. But I mean, it was
he used a very precise IED.
Yeah, very precise. But yeah, it's just this episode highlighted some of like the better things from the series, but also some of the things that made the series like fall flat for me. And like
Yeah.
in the end, it's like I was just I didn't rewatch the series or the episode, but I did. It did make me. I was thinking about it, and it made me think. I was like, you know, it kind of like ended with like a whimper for me, especially because like I liked the one before the last one. I
Yeah.
liked that one, even though he did threaten the kid. I liked that one a lot more.
Yeah.
And then in the end, and then Ben, like Ben is spoiler alert. Ben is also on that list. He was one like an anonymous name, and he kills him in the end. And I was like, I saw that coming from like a little bit earlier on, but it wraps up, nicely. And at that point, like, how could he let him go after everything he's done? He's proven like he's got to kill the people on this list, no matter what. And so he's got to kill his friend too. He's just like very, So I just wonder where it would go from here. What kind of Reese are we following in the season 2? If there is a season 2, I mean, I know there's other books, but
that moment on the boat, one of the few moments in the series that really got me in the feels was when Ben tells Reese, dude, you don't have to do this. We can just leave right now and hit the beach in Venezuela and just chill out and see what comes up on the tide. And Reese says, no, I can't do that, man. Wait for my head to blow up down there. That's not how this is going to go. And then Ben tries one more time, says, you don't have to die alone. And it gives me chills thinking about it. Reese looks to his left, and all his dead buddies are there putting on their shit, ready to go over the railroad boat. He goes, not alone. So I'm like, I mean, game, set, match. That was clear. That was nothing else was needed to be explained. His motivation, and I won't say that justifies what comes next, but it certainly explains it.
Oh yeah.
If the memory of his teammates is that fresh in his head, maybe because of his psychological trauma, the TBI, and the meds making the thing grow in his head, his motivation will remain very high all the way to the end. And they do kind of give a foretaste, as Sam was saying. Ben challenges, I can't believe you trust this guy. I forget his name. The guy who's in the boat.
Brave Hastings. Great character in the books. Yeah.
And Reese replies, I still trust you, don't I? And I went, that's a strange thing to say right about now. I'm sure it means nothing.
Yeah.
But during our pregame, we brought up and talked about, and I think Sam, as a filmmaker, I think your thoughts are the most valuable about the whole FBI character and subplot.
Yeah, it was. I'll compare it to like a film that I just did, where it was running a little too long, the film, but there was one section that we had that we could just pull out, like literally, like pulled right out and threw it away, save it for another thing, and it works better. It works better because we pulled it out. The flow is better, the pacing is better, everything about the movie is better because of that. And they could have done that with the FBI. If you pulled every bit of the FBI thing out, you don't lose anything. You just gain that pacing. You gain not having to sit through the Avalanche episode and all that shit. And I get, somebody has to chase Reese. Reese is blowing shit up in public. He can't just get away with it. But I almost would have preferred like unnamed, like, law enforcement's chasing him, and just let that be that instead of what we got, which was just, I mean, at best, okay. At worst, just really boring and takes you out of the action.
Yeah.
Everybody that thinks an FBI agent would really have let Reese walk, put their hands in the air. Yeah, me neither.
Yeah. Well, and because do you want to answer for that if somebody else witnessed it? Like, no, not a chance. And furthermore, he's just so like the actor's fine. Like I'm not saying he's poorly acted, but he's just so generic.
The character has nothing to offer. The cops, the sidekick to the cop is actually more interesting.
Mac
has more genuine emotion about her performance.
Yeah, she has at least one good scene where she calls out Horn on the Bone Frog tattoo.
Yeah,
I'm like, okay, that was actually, it was a good little scene. when she calls out Horn for the wannabe he is. But yeah, no, I agree. The FBI arc is so it is a distraction.
Yeah,
it's filler. It's
Yeah.
just it's not needed. Like have one episode less, have a
Yeah.
tighter series, and easy
Yeah,
peasy.
absolutely. So
have all of
Go
you
ahead, Mike.
watched the film? Gosh, what's it called? It's a series. I think it's also on Prime, called Reacher.
Yeah,
I haven't yet.
I like Reacher a lot.
Yeah, so I was trying to gauge the rewatchability of this first season of Terminalist. And the first time I watched, I'm like, it's actually got surprisingly high rewatchability. And I went back to look at the episodes and refresh my memory in preparation for the podcast that we're making right now. I realized that it really is episode dependent, because the episodes are not of equivalent quality in a uniform way. My favorite episode by far is the one where one of the bad guy SEALs drowns to death under Old Misery.
Cox,
Because
Cox.
It was both a novel way to kill someone, right, as well as being ironic, right, because you're killing this SEAL in his preferred element, right? And I don't think they explained it adequately. A big part of first phase basic conditioning SEAL school is log PT. And there's a log called Old Misery. It's actually carved in the side. It's one of the classes in the roughly 120s, so called coming up on 25 years ago, found an old log that was twice the diameter of a standard log, so more than twice as heavy. And they carved Old Misery in it, and the staff thought that was an amazing idea. And so the losing boat crew on every log race has to drop their log and take Old Misery for the next race. And the lesson they teach is, if you keep losing, even with this handicap, because now you're carrying Old Misery, you keep Old Misery.
Oof.
And so people find this strength. They're so just like disgusted with having this thing on their shoulders that it isn't just hard, it physically hurts, right? If you ever carry something hard on your clavicle and it presses hard, now imagine running over uneven ground without bouncing off your clavicle. It's really physically unpleasant, as well as being hard and moving around and do sit-ups and so forth. And
SEAL training is physically unpleasant, Mike?
Well, between the pedicures and the hair massages and treatments and so forth, yeah. Let's keep first things first, right? But the only way you make log PT work, let alone survive Old Misery, is with really tight teamwork and everybody, despite the discomfort, believing in their buddies and all driving together. So that short speech that Reese's character gave might be, at least from a Frogman's perspective, the most important one of the entire show, because it's such a personal, strong memory that every SEAL carries, is moving that log at night in the surf, getting your ass kicked in with your buddies, and then making it work. And this one of the fictions of buds in SEAL school is that the students think that the staff is there to keep you out, to screen you out. And in reality, all the training the staff gets is you're trying to screen the students in, and they self-select out, because that's one of the qualities that whether it's the right thing or wrong thing to focus on, and for that particular part of SOCOM's forces is a different debate. But it is a deliberate choice made by leadership and by the community since 1962, is that the students self-select out. There are rarely drops where the student says, I want to stay, and the staff says, no, you're going. It can happen for things like if they get caught with anabolic steroids, or they get caught stealing, which is an automatic, they're gone, and things like that. So people do get dropped.
Integrity violations.
Yeah, exactly. But it's really rare for a student who's really putting out to get booted just because we don't like them. Like, I can't think of that ever happening. They just fail, and they self-select out. So that death, that murder scene, is chef's kiss.
Yeah.
As I'm transitioning from the death of Ben and literally re-sailing off into the sunset, and now the terminalist is complete, and he drops the kid's painting and the list on the back over the side, I'm thinking about the whole rewatchability index, coming back to the Reacher thing, and in a scale of 1 to 10, where say, I don't know, All in the Family with Archie Bunker is a 1. And what's a really rewatchable franchise? Help me out, guys.
Babylon 5, Deep Space Nine.
Deep Space Nine
Lost.
is a 10. Or I don't know. Lost had the problem with the latter episodes. Early Lost episodes were pretty good, but
I loved it all. I loved it all. I rewatched that.
So
No,
whatever your personal 10 is,
Yeah.
I would rate this. I came out at first watch. This is about between a 7 and an 8. Good episodes even higher than that. But now, after having rewatched almost every episode, I'm like, some of those episodes are a solid 8, but some of them are in the 5 range.
I think that's fair.
Yeah.
I think I'd rather rewatch the whole first season of Reacher with all of its serious flaws, of which there were
fun.
many.
It's fun though,
because
you get around it.
There was almost as much violence.
Yeah,
but it was
more like
than wholesale.
More fake violence though.
Yeah.
It feels more like a movie. There wasn't the filler that existed with the FBI in that series. Yeah. It was just like, I would rewatch that. It's tough to rewatch anything nowadays because there's so much shit out there. But that, for me, absolutely. I was thinking about the same thing earlier today when I was thinking about the series. I was like, Reacher, because I can, it's all military, adjacent shows. So Reacher was, far and away, more rewatchable, more entertaining. This was better than the Jack Ryan first season. I haven't seen the second season of that. But
no, I agree. And you're right. It isn't just military adjacent. It's the same basic plot. Military veteran, highly capable, loses one of the members of his family, and has to fall back on his core skills to uncover the plot and bring all the bad guys to justice. And along the way, picks up, the plucky sidekick who happens to be female, right? And gets help from his existing network of veteran buddies, right? Yeah. In a lot of ways, they use a lot of the same tropes, but the impact is different. And I won't say it's hard to describe that fight scene in the prison, for example, as lighthearted. But the things that the character says at the start and the finish make it funny, right? They give you like a little amuse-bouche at the start, and you're like, oh, this is going to be good. And then like 5 seconds of brutal hand-to-hand combat unarmed, right? And then the good guy finishes, and then he adds a nice little Jack Reacher quip.
Yeah.
And that's that lightheartedness wasn't present in Terminal. It's by design, of course. It's a different story, but more rewatchable for sure.
Well, and I would point out, Sam and I were actually talking in the pre-game before you were able to join us, Mike, about tone. Because what I said is when I'm grading military realism, I use different mental grading sheets based on the tone you give me. So when I sit down for Top Gun Maverick, it's a different rubric, right? I'm not grading Top Gun Maverick by the same rubric I'm using on Saving Private Ryan. Those are two different, you set completely different tones. You told me completely different things about your intent for this movie. So Top Gun Maverick, I don't give a shit that first hypersonic test flight absolutely would have atomized Tom Cruise. Does not matter. It does not matter.
You can't eject in Mach 11 and survive? Come on.
Yeah.
Sure you could.
I'm not a physicist.
He wouldn't even be like an atmospheric smear of atoms, man. They would have been he'd like fine ash drifting down.
Yeah, it wouldn't even be a pink mist. But regardless, it does not matter. It legitimately does not matter for that movie because they set the tone of like, hey, did you like Top Gun? You liked Top Gun? Okay, well, we're gonna do that.
Top Gun?
Yeah, but we're gonna do that with modern effects and really good acting and good emotional arcs for the characters.
We could do a Top Gun, just one show on Top Gun, because they did so many things right, despite the lack of realism. I mean, they didn't just lean into it; they embraced every trope and took it out on $1,000 date with a 5-course dinner and Dom Perignon 65, right? It was, and I can't think of a single meaningful or important scene in Top Gun that Maverick didn't revisit in a respectful way, respecting the fans' enthusiasm, and yet occasionally bringing in something a little bit new. There was I think one of the reasons that film did so well is there was no subversion of expectations as a writing or directorial choice.
Yep.
You like Top Gun? I'm going to give you some goddamn Top Gun, and you're going to like it. And you're like, yeah, boy.
Good fan service.
Yeah.
It's okay to serve fans. You know?
Yeah.
As long as you do a good job of it.
Yeah, it's 12-inch Star Spangled Freedom boner all the way through. like oh my gosh, it was so amazing. Like, and then they open and here's the actual scene that does it. They open with F-18s launching off the deck of an aircraft carrier for no fucking reason other than F-18s launching off the deck of an aircraft carrier to Kenny Loggins is awesome. So they're telling you, they're like, hey guys, buckle in, we're gonna have fun. Don't think about it.
It's going to be okay. Just relax and accept. We're not going to do this wrong. And I sat there in the theater, and it's a brand called Sinopolis where you can lean back and order drinks, and it's got the full reclining seat. It's like being in international first class. It's the ticket costs twice as much, but for a really important movie where important means I want to enjoy it, I'll dish it out, right? Mm-hmm. So I'm like, and the movie's theater's it's almost deserted. It's like 2:00 in the afternoon, and I'm in 5 rows back, center row, no one in sight. I have to lean back with my arms, and when they hit that music, I'm like, oh, it's going to be all right. You know what? I know where I am now. This is good. And the whole movie was like that. And I'm like, you know what? I get that this is totally unrealistic, but that's all right.
Yeah, I do not care. I don't even care that they borrowed the trench run from Star Wars. Does not bother me. Does not bother me. I mean, Star Wars borrowed the trench run from Star Wars. I don't care. But the whole point, like I did have a point about Terminal List coming back to this, believe it or not, is that so when you end up, I feel like, and I like Terminal List, and I'll talk a little bit about my hopes for season 2 because I think the second book is much better than the first book in the series. The one of the big problems with the Terminal List is I feel like they're in an uncanny valley of military realism because they try for a lot of verisimilitude in many aspects, but then they sacrifice to the limits of their production budget or the limits of, like you were talking about the lighting on the beach assault. We talked about the lighting in the sewage system in episode 1. You know, and it's hard to fault them for it, but it does create the situation where you're like, oh, you are trying to be more realistic than Jack Reacher or Top Gun, but you're not as realistic as, say, Band of Brothers, you know, or even Black Hawk Down, although everyone in Black Hawk Down was too pretty. Like they all looked like models, and while I love my Ranger brethren, they look like normal dudes who are very fit most of the time. So that it kind of puts Terminal List in an uncanny valley where if you're military, you're thinking about how it would actually work, and ergo you do catch the things that don't make sense from a tactical perspective. Whereas if, like, apparently Reacher, I haven't seen it, so I'm going off what you guys are telling me. Reacher communicates, hey, you're not here for that. You're here for something else. Whereas Terminal List kind of communicates, hey, you're here for the authenticity, but then kind of falls short in the authenticity in places. It makes it a valid criticism of the show.
Sure. Yeah, because they were going for as close to realism as...
And they had a ton of people like you on the...
making art would allow, with the constraints on audience being able to see what was happening, right?
Yeah.
And there were a few, Bob, as you know, moments where they had to explain, because the average audience member isn't going to understand some of the things that your average operator, I hate using that term, your average active duty policeman, fireman, soldier, airman, whatever, that actually is in that environment is going to get. You mentioned Black Hawk Down. You mentioned Saving Private Ryan. I'd like to ask our filmmaker, while we have this rare opportunity, what is the next two or three examples that filmmakers use as a success story in getting the right balance, the best possible balance between realism and the limits of the art?
What do you mean in terms of just like military movies, or in terms of
In terms of the military? So I never hit the beach. I can't speak to the accuracy of Saving Private Ryan, but a lot of the things that they showed that way for the first time, at least in my cinematic entertainment consuming life, and it was real enough that it disturbed me a little bit because it was a bit too accurate. I was one of the guys who spent some time in Mogadishu, and other than people being entirely too pretty, that film was authentic enough that I could smell that nasty, shitty yellow dust all over again. Like for the next 3 hours, I'm like, it was just, it's unpleasant. So I'm looking for what's another example of a movie that was just dead nuts. And I can only think of one maybe, but I imagine Israeli commandos to say that wasn't anything like that. I always felt that the movie called Entebbe, which is about the rescue of the El Al flight in Entebbe.
Great on Entebbe, yeah.
I think, and it was made like in the late 70s or early 80s. It's not a very sophisticated film in terms of the technical, but I remember watching it going, that, when it's dark, when it's meant to be dark, it's actually dark. And when they're actually shooting reasonably accurately in terms of the portrayal for the period.
Yeah. I will say, go ahead, Sam.
No, I don't really think in terms of that so much. I mean, I think when you're talking about like that kind of accuracy, I think The Revenant with Leo DiCaprio, they really hyped that up as being super accurate because they only use like the sun and the moon as their lights. So if they didn't have the light, they didn't use like a light kit like we would use. They just like, it was legit. And like, if you can't see, you can't see because you couldn't see in real life. As a filmmaker, as somebody who has done that stuff, you have to find the balance. You really do. And especially like with, I can't get away with shit that like, bigger budgets can. So like if I'm filming in like a campfire only lights so much of the woods up, so you have to like play around with like, well, this is the moon now, and the moon is lighting this much more than it normally would, but you just got to go with it. And if you
match like, the color temperature of moonlight, you can probably get away with it though.
Yeah, I mean, and there's degrees to it too, because you also got to match the shadows and all that shit. Mm-hmm. But yeah, it's a tough balance for like most filmmakers. But I would, off the top of my head, I wouldn't really.
I haven't seen. I'm the second guy that probably hasn't seen The Revenant, other than the trailers. So now I think I need to go see it.
I wasn't a huge fan. It's a technologically, cinematographically, whatever the word is. It's impressive in that way, but I wasn't blown away with it, honestly.
Okay,
but it's worth seeing just to the visually.
I will say a movie that does not get enough attention in my mind that I would put as equal to Saving Private Ryan is Hacksaw Ridge.
I was gonna say Hacksaw Ridge, but I don't know how like authentic it is because my mind doesn't really work that way. But I
think it's at least as authentic as Saving Private Ryan. It's based on a real guy, Desmond Doss, and it has the advantage of being a real story. The biggest problem with Saving Private Ryan is the setup of, because of one family's grief, we're going to expend a captain and a squad of Rangers. And I know this sounds cold-blooded, but that's not how we work. That's not what we do. So if Mike and I were leaders, we were officers, and if you're an NCO, it's the same deal. The only way this is fair, because you're spending lives to accomplish missions, right? You're sending people into situations they could get killed, and in some cases, you're sending them into situations where they're very likely to get killed.
Yeah,
and the only way it's possibly fair is if you're making those decisions based on the needs of the mission. and not based on personal emotions or whose family you care about. That's the whole.
But the writers cheated, right? Because in the end, they made the presence of the surviving Rangers at the bridge with Private Ryan and his shrunken command central to securing objectives to ensure that the bad guy reinforcements don't get across the bridge, right? So they kind of covered their butt there towards the end, but the characters themselves have this discussion in the movie.
Yeah, and I would point out
more than once.
Yeah, and I would point out the privates who are bitching at Captain Miller are right in this instance, and I don't. When I was an officer, I would never admit that, but in that movie, the soldiers who are bitching about the misallocation of resources are correct. But we as Americans are very emotional people, and we're meant to understand that they're incorrect, and that saving one private at the cost of 6 or 7 other better trained privates is a good deal. It's not. And that I love that movie. Don't get me wrong. I still love Saving Private Ryan. But as a veteran and as a military history major and as 12 or 13 other identifiers I could list, like it bothers me that they couldn't just make a movie about World War II without something kind of schmaltzy at the core of it. Like, and I you're perfectly free to disagree with me. I'm not saying that my opinion is the end all be all, but it does bother me.
There's only 2 survivors from that Ranger squad, right? The attachment linguist and the bar gunner.
Yep. Ed Burns and I don't know who played Upham.
I really, really, really didn't like the character of the linguist.
Yeah, no one does.
I guess it's a different podcast, but yeah.
Yeah. What we have run far afield. One note I wanted to make, this is complete. I'm just jumping right into this. This is completely unrelated to what we were just talking about, but I did want to make this note. I found it interesting. In the opening credits of the Terminal List, you have several images. You have a close-up of a bookshelf that has Once an Eagle, The Art of War. I think von Clausewitz's Von Krieg on War is on there. But you also have a black and white print of a knight with a hunting dog viewing a white stag. And I found that interesting because I'm also doing, in parallel with this series, Mona Lisa Foster and I are reviewing Shadow and Bone, and the white stag is important iconography in that series as well. I think all 3 of us have read the Dragonlance books. The white stag is also used in those books to great effect to impart the quest. So when I was researching, the white stag goes back to Arthurian myth, and maybe even before that. The white stag leads the knight into the quest. The point is not to kill the stag, but to quote Baden Powell, the founder of the Boy Scouts, "The white stag has a message for you. Hunters of old pursued the miraculous stag, not because they expected to kill it, but because it led them in the joy of the chase to new and fresh adventures, and so to capture happiness. You may look on the white stag as the true spirit of scouting, springing forward and upward, ever leading you onward to leap over difficulties, to face new adventures in your active pursuit of the higher aims of scouting." The reason I say that is because the books from here, the Terminal List is probably the grimmest of the books. And I will say that the next book, which is True Believer, I do believe it's titled, is much more fun, much more interesting, much more of a traditional Tom Clancy or Ian Fleming style thriller. And I think if they shoot it right and they do it right, requires less suspension of disbelief than the first season required in a lot of places. So I just found that interesting.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, they did the White Stag in House of the Dragon recently too.
Oh, they used it in there as well.
It's all over the place.
In which one?
House of the Dragon.
The
Game of Thrones series.
It's in episode 3, I think, when they're coming back from the hunt and they find the white stag after.
Her father can't find it.
Yeah, it's used. You could argue it's used in the same way, that iconography.
Mhm.
That you could claim that that's the start of her real character arc.
Yeah.
When she comes back all bloody from that encounter and blows past her guards. We've been watching that as well, and it's interesting.
Yeah, I'm a fan.
Game of Thrones burned me so hard. I haven't been able to tune in yet.
I can understand that. That was a rough ending.
I'm you know that meme that shows the drawing of the horse, right?
Yeah.
I'm just focusing on the first 2 panels of that drawing, and so far the first 6 episodes of House of the Dragon is much more in those first 2 panels than that which came after.
Yeah.
I hear you.
That doesn't mean it's going to end the same way, but cross fingers.
Let's hope not.
Yeah.
All right, we're closing out an hour, so I'll start to wrap us up. Gentlemen, final thoughts on the Terminal List. If they get a season 2, would you be willing to rejoin me to talk about that one, or are you pretty much done with the series at this point?
You first, Sam.
I'm done. No, I'll watch. I'm down. I didn't I'm not going to rewatch the first season. Like Mike hit that on the head. It's not the most rewatchable because it's so uneven. But I'll definitely tune in for season 2 and I'll talk about it in a group forum.
Mm-hmm.
I would have to watch a few episodes first. I'd probably go at least 3 episodes deep, and then I'd make the decision. When I was watching this one, I'll tell you, at the end of the first episode, I wasn't sold on Terminal List, right? And by the end of episode 3 or 4, I'm like, all right, this is actually pretty solid. I'm totally down. And then if we pretend that the Avalanche episode didn't happen, that would take it from a C+, B- to a solid B or better. But it really depends what you're comparing it to. And like you said, the rubric for how you gauge it isn't just by picking another military-adjacent sort of crime thriller, right? It's what is the intent of what the director hopes to show. I'd say they did a better than decent job, and certainly there are much worse streaming options available to you. So to our listeners that are still thinking about it, if they stuck with this far and they got all the spoilers, hell, go for it. And have some Hoot and Young while you're doing it, which is the whiskey from the very first episode.
Which is good whiskey.
It is. I found a bottle here in San Diego at a specialty shop down, no shocker, down near Coronado.
You can't. This is my shock face. So yeah, no, that's awesome. I don't have much to add. I agree with you. There are definitely some things about the show that could have been better, but overall, I had a good time watching it. I think the second book is the stronger book. So I hope that if they get a second season, it'll be the stronger season as well. So hopefully we can be even more enthusiastic about this one. Sam, what's out now? What do you want to tell the folks about, and where can they find you?
So last week was Narrowbridge Films Day. The mayor of my city named September 23rd Narrowbridge Films Day a couple years ago. So we always try to release things on that day. So we have 2 shorts that are now up on our website called First, which is about the first guy to ever send a dick pic, and a short called The Last Rehearsal of the Dangerous Kitten, which is a one-shot. It's a oneer about the last rehearsal of a children's play that goes terribly wrong. And then we have a new trailer for my horror anthology, which is going to be playing in Orlando at the Orlando Film Festival, if Orlando is still standing at the end of the month, October 27th through the 3rd. And we don't know what date is, but if you're in Florida, if you have friends in Florida, spread the word. Follow us on Facebook and Instagram so that we can spread the word and try to get an audience out there. That'd be great.
Awesome. Prayers for Florida. Prayers for everyone who's weathering that hurricane right now. Mike, what's out now? What's up next? What are you excited about?
Let's see. The next thing coming out is going to be the compendium of the Chuck Gannon additional novels set in his Kane Reorderverse, and that should be out in March. I'm turning in a story, and then this upcoming weekend, which is going to be in the Larry Correa and Casey Azell edited anthology called Down These Mean Streets, which is a fantasy noir kind of story in that world. And then about a month later, I turn in another short story, this one in Johnny Ringo's Black Tide Rising universe, for the 4th anthology, which is called Together We Stand. And those 2 anthologies should be out next summer and next fall, respectively.
Nice, very nice. I've been enjoying the second volume of the noir anthology.
No City for Nights. No Game for Nights.
No Game for Nights and Chicks in Tank Tops and World's Long Lost. It's currently called The Bane Civil War because they're all duking it out for top anthology on Amazon right now. So that always makes me happy to see my friends and fellow authors kicking ass. So links to everything we've talked about will be below, as always. It's been a great time talking to you guys. Love chatting with you, and tune in the future. Mike, Sam, and I are going to have plenty more to talk about since Mike and I are authors of prose literature. We may actually talk about books at some point in the near, not too distant future.
Crazy talk.
That is all the time we have for the Lore and Valor podcast tonight. Thanks for tuning in and watching. Please consider liking, subscribing, ringing the bell, or leaving a 5-star review on your podcast venue of choice. I hope to see you next time, and until then, keep up the fire.